I'm here at the Canberra Kingston railway station, the only train station in all of the ACT that's left. I'm of course lying, this is actually the old Royalla train station in the middle of nowhere that closed down in the 80s due to a lack of service. Well, I'm afraid it's a good example of what could happen to Canberra within the coming years. Maybe.
The first railway into Canberra in 1914 was only a simple branch of Queanbeyan, supplying materials to the city and coal to the power station.
However, by 1919 the railway was already at a loss of about £3,000 per year. There were threats to close it by the Department of Works and Railways, but how else would you get coal to the Kingston powerhouse?
By 1920, the department still wasn't too keen on keeping the trains running, but by then no one was listening to them anyway, so services continued.
And to cut maintenance costs, they simply didn't maintain the railway. How smart.
Originally, roundabout crazy Walter Burley Griffin, the designer of Canberra, intended for a railway network to be built across the capital. His plans had 10 stations, a T-intersection thingy and an underground section in the city. No one liked his first proposal because most of the stations were in the middle of absolutely nowhere.
So a second, more condensed plan was put forward, just to build the bit that crossed the lake, ran through the city and underground. But unsurprisingly, this was never started and instead was thrown into the too hard basket. In the meantime, a temporary extension was given the go-ahead. Assembly of the new line from Kingston into the city began in December 1920 on a budget of £5,370, which in today's money could get you nearly 500,000 curly-whirlies. The funds given to the track extension were apparently not very much, and so a rather dodgy job was done instead, cutting corners where possible and making the flimsiest bridge imaginable. When the railway was complete in 1921, trains began running over the river and into the city with no problems at all. In June 1922, speed restrictions were put on the new bridge of about 6 miles an hour out of fear of the bridge collapsing. And then it did. After 18 months of being open, the bridge fell into the water due to seasonal flooding and other things. Back on the Kingston side of the broken mess, there were reports of a missing train and rolling stock, and the search was on.
And then the search stopped because they found it, on the city side of the broken mess. Now they were in quite a pickle. They had no way to get the train back, so they rebuilt the bridge to the barest minimum and brought it back over. During all of this bridge kerfuffle, there were many considerations to continue the railway into the city properly, with a nicer bridge and nicer budget. The 1920s saw genuine considerations of a brand new railway into the city, and the future of train travel in and around Canberra was looking bright.
Then in 1930, the commission responsible for approving railway projects completely collapsed, and all conversations of the railway extension were halted, until 1934 when they started again and then quickly stopped when one smart man said,
"Every bridge we try to build across that river will most certainly go kaput every time."
Or something like that. And in the end, that was also put in the too hard basket. So with that, all construction of a proper city railway halted eternally, and the bridge was still swimming in the river. In fact, it stayed like that, and there was no reason to get rid of it. Sitting there from July 1922 till March 1940, and it was only removed for the iron rails that could be used for the war effort. News of the bridge destruction reached as far as Queensland in 1940. The newspapers smugly stated, "Its disappearance recalls one of the famous blunders of Canberra during the early days," going so far as to suggest that it was one of Canberra's greatest landmarks. Rude. In 1949, land set aside for the railway was then used for residential buildings, covering the tracks of the railway forever. But the failed railway extensions within the city weren't the only rail propositions that failed. For example, during the First World War, it was suggested to build an artillery factory in the Tuggeranong area along the Murrumbidgee River, connected by rail from either the existing station or the nearby Bombala line. Either way, it didn't matter because it never happened. And it's a good thing too. That factory would have destroyed the most beautiful beach in Canberra. Connecting Canberra to Yass was also a well-debated project that never happened. The existing road connection in 1914 was described as a highway that is not.
increasing demand for a railway link. The route was first surveyed in 1916 and ready to begin construction in the 1920s, but those in Yass weren't ready to meet Canberra halfway. But then nothing happened till 1966 when new plans were written out. But then in 5 years, they came to an end when they weren't considered economically viable. A railway line to Jervis Bay was considered, but was so stupid it never even started. As the Commonwealth Surveyor General wisely said in 1921, "I do not think there is the slightest hope of any development work being undertaken for a long time." Canberra branched off an existing line that travelled through Cooma and out to Bombala. After complaints from politicians about the unsatisfactory railway connection to Melbourne, adjustments were made to accommodate the special little snowflakes, so travelling was a little easier. However, it still took far too many hours and an awkward changeover at Goulburn or Yass. An extension of the Bombala line into Melbourne would have been brilliant and probably not that hard to do at all. There was a country town in Victoria, Orbost, which was only 100 k's away from Bombala at the end of the New South Wales line. Definitely doable, but no one ever drew a line between the two, so nothing ever happened. The Bombala line even closed in 1986 due to a lack of traffic.